Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Natural Female Muscle Podcast. Today, for episode number 45, we are going to discuss the topic that is bodybuilding prep is not a dieting contest. That is the reminder for today's episode, an episode that is very well timed at this time of the year now that the season is among us. And I'm very excited to dive into today's episode. But before I do, I just want to start by saying, again, a huge shout out, huge thank you to all of you guys who do listen to the podcast, who do stay up to date, or even if you're just tuning in, you're new here, welcome. These are generally episodes where we sometimes get guests. I also generally just tend to ramble about topics that I hope are helpful. But I want to say a huge thank you to anyone who does listen. If you do listen and enjoy the episodes, please do rate the podcast if you can do. If you're on YouTube, if you can subscribe as well to the channel, or even just hop over to Spotify and give me a little bit of a rating. Obviously, if you do like it, if you don't, I'm not holding you hostage. But it is fantastic to gain that feedback, and it does really help me out a lot. So if you can do that, that would mean the absolute world. But yeah, we're going to hop into today's episode. Like I say, this is a very well-timed episode now that the season is starting, which is so exciting. I cannot wait. I always get so excited when the season starts to come around, but especially this year, I've got a really good team of ladies getting on stage that I can't wait to see. And I think we're only just over 3 weeks away now at the time of recording from the MBW Classic. Then we've got PCA Naturals. Then we've got WMBF. Absolutely buzzing. And then from there, it will all kick off. So yeah, lots of good stuff coming, which I can't believe how fast the time has flown. The last solo episode I did for you guys was the start of April, which doesn't even feel like that long ago now, but at the same time, it feels like a lifetime ago. So that was when I went over to see Meg compete, which she actually won that show, which was amazing. So she is going to the Olympia, which I'm absolutely buzzing for her. I'm so sad that I won't be there because it's actually the same weekend as the UKDFBA finals, or now I suppose it's an open international show where I'll have clients competing. So I won't be able to be there to support her, but I'm obviously very glad that I was there to see her win her first pro show, which was pretty cool. And I'm definitely going to bring you guys a little bit of an update on kind of, I suppose, where I'm at and this kind of diet phase that I'm in very soon, I suppose, within the next few episodes. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, definitely keep your eyes peeled. But yeah, the season is coming. So this episode today to remind you guys that bodybuilding prep is not a dieting contest. Yeah, sure, seems obvious from the outside. I know people say it all the time, but we all need to be reminded of this, athletes and coaches, honestly, because you see it every season. Like there's always someone, or we've all even been there ourselves as athletes, or even as coaches, if we're self-coaching, whatever it is, where, you get into that headspace, that mindset where, you kind of lose, I suppose, your focus and the purpose of bodybuilding, and you get distracted by this goal of like, okay, we need to get leaner, like I need to be shredded, or I need to look like this. And we sometimes forget what bodybuilding is actually about. And I think it's hard because as bodybuilders, generally, we are the type of people who want to push to extremes. Like we love the suffering. We are all a little bit nuts, I think, in some way, shape, or form. Like we like to suffer, we like to push hard, we want to see what we can do to take things, as far as possible. But that isn't the sole goal of bodybuilding and competing. It's not, and you go down that rabbit hole. It's like we want to do more, we want to eat less, we want to get leaner and leaner, but you have to draw a line because at its root, like that's not what bodybuilding is. Bodybuilding is, realistically, when we look at competitive bodybuilding, it's displaying your best level of muscularity relative to the set criteria. We get lean so that we can do this, because when we have a lot of body fat, we can't see the muscle that's there. But that's not to say that we're removing all body fat in order to do that, especially when we take criteria into context. because, especially as natural athletes as well, there is an art to displaying muscularity through condition without sacrificing that muscularity. And that's truly the way that I see it. Like, I see bodybuilding and coaching as a bit of an art because, yes, there's obviously a huge scientific aspect to it, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what we see and how we present that, and presenting that in the best way possible based on like understanding people, communicating with people, and understanding things on a deeper level than, especially in the latter stages, what is not just data. Because if bodybuilding and competing was just about data, if it was just about who gets on stage and who's the leanest, you know what we'd all do? We'd all just go off coaching sheets. We'd all just go off body weight and DEXA scans. And then we'd all stand on stage, and the leanest person on stage or the person with the most muscularity would win. But that's not what bodybuilding is. It's not. It's an art form, and we stand on stage and we look visually. Because I can guarantee you, if you took those DEXA scan results from everyone, whether they're accurate or not, that's another debate. But you'd see that probably in all those lineups, like the person with the most muscle maybe didn't win, or the person who was the most shredded probably didn't win. Like, that's not how bodybuilding is. So we have to really, really remember that. And we're going to go through like a few different things today, relative to, things we also have to take into consideration when it comes to also, your level of muscularity and the class, like I say, that we're going to dive into below. But simply put, this is not a dieting contest. It's not about who can diet the hardest, because that's another thing as well. It's not even just like who's the leanest. It's also not about who suffers the most, like, we often like to think. And I was kind of thinking about this. It's very similar to basically being the opposite of what we would say, or I would at least say, in off season. It's like, just like prep is not a dieting contest. It's just like how off season is not who can put on the most body fat or who can eat the most food contest. And that's a topic for another day, which I will probably cover soon, because this episode has very much reminded me of that. But that's something that we do have to remember. So we're going to start by addressing the main part, which is, like I say, prep isn't about doing everything that you physically can for fat loss. And I think that you get a better understanding of this the more that you compete, or the more that you prep people, or you go through diet phases and fat loss processes yourself. But people get very, very, very distracted by just wanting to do more simply because they physically can. So this is a case of like, say, client A like checks in and they go, I'm actually not that hungry. I'm not ravenous this week. You can drop my food. Or, I've got more time in the day to do more steps, up my steps, or I can push more on the Stairmaster. Like, I'm not dead by the end of it. I'll do another 10 minutes. But why? Why do you need to do that just because you can? Because that's not the goal. The goal is fat loss and setting up a productive deficit. We want to see an appropriate rate of loss, which for most people in a prep is going to be 1%, maybe sub 1% in the latter stages, maybe 1.5% of their body weight in the earlier stages. That's it. Those are those maximum ranges, like just below 1 or just around 1.5. So we're looking to see that appropriate rate of loss where we're pulling off body fat and maintaining muscle mass. And we're also able to do that because we're also not pushing so hard that then you're driving up a whole bunch of fatigue, and then also significantly affecting training. Like, that's then just a point where you're just doing more for the sake of doing more and not actually getting positive return. If anything, you're then actually getting negative return. Now, the way that you set this up will always be dependent on the individual. Like, I'm not saying that sometimes you will need to be pushed and you will be doing a lot, because some people will have to do a lot. And that depends on a number of different things. Like, you're looking at what sort of setup is going to work for that individual in their day-to-day lifestyle. How amount of body fat they've got to come off, for what rate of loss they need to see. Like, some people will only need a slow rate of loss if they've maybe only got 20 pounds to pull off in a prep. Some people might have 40 pounds to pull up in a prep, and they need to be at that 1.5% for the whole prep. So that's going to affect the extremity of the deficit. And also, relative to how big or small you are, like that's also going to affect how much that you have to do in order to be in that level of a deficit. But you don't need to do more than that. Like if you are looking at your check-in and you are looking at doing all of those things, ticking those boxes, amazing. I mean, honestly, like worst case scenario, even when you're quote unquote behind, you then have to like weigh up the pros and cons, because people sometimes get to these stages in prep where they think, shit, like I've got a bit more to pull off. I'm going to hammer it. Like, it's hammer time. Like, let's go. But then they're pushing so hard that now like they're sacrificing their muscle. And it's like, hold on here. Like, what do we want to do? Do we want to step on stage and actually look like a bodybuilder? Or are you trying to get on stage and chasing lines in your quads and your glutes, but now sacrificing your shape and the muscle that you built, so you're actually going to place worse? Like, and I've seen this so many times where sometimes like the guy or the girl who actually isn't maybe all the way in shape, but has kept, their muscularity intact, because again, bodybuilding, like they do better than the people who've just buried themselves, and no surprise. I mean, obviously in an ideal world, you want both, but sometimes you don't get both, and sometimes you have to be smart with how you kind of lay that out. But before I suppose I always get distracted down these routes. The thing to come back to here is, are we ticking those boxes that we need to see? So rate of loss is coming down well. Visually, we are taking good steps forward. Performance is still moving well, especially in these like earlier stages of a prep. Like, because this is the thing, is people start prepping, they're like, I want to be lean straight away. It's like, no, you got to trust the process. Like, this is where the saying comes in. People just throw the kitchen sink at it for no good reason. They're just throwing everything at it for no good reason. And sometimes I feel as though this maybe can actually come from a place of like almost like not even understanding where a deficit even needs to be, because you look at the start of the prep and people think, oh, okay, cool, let's bang in, 40 minutes cardio every single day, let's go. And it's like, why though? Like, do you actually need to do that? Or do you just need to drop your food, up your steps a little bit, maybe a little bit of cardio, but that's it? Like, you don't need to throw everything at it at once. I know sometimes as well, people say like, all of my tools like have been used, or sometimes people, it's that balance of like, don't use all the tools in your toolbox. And there is, again, like I've just touched upon, there is a balance to be had with this, because some people will need to use more of those tools earlier on than others. And sometimes you go through phases where you use those tools more aggressively, and then you take a step back, and then you put the tools back in the toolbox for a little bit, and then you pull them back out again. Because you will have different phases of maybe needing to push and pull. But the gist of things is that if things are trending as they need to, or if things are on plan as they need to, you as the athlete have to put trust in that process, especially if you've never been through a prep before. It can be really hard because say you're 16, 18 weeks out and, things have moved down really well. You're maybe a good 15 pounds down already, or whatever it may be. And you're thinking like, oh shit, but I'm not lean yet. And because you've never been through what those next 16 weeks look like yet, you think, I want to do everything now. But you don't realize like you've still got a really good amount of time ahead of you. Your coach has probably already really mapped out exactly what that's going to look like. And you have to put trust in your coach at that point to know, okay, like it will come off, and it will come off well when I do everything that I need to do. And just remembering that along the process is really, really important, because again, just remember like more does not always mean better. And those phases of being pushed will be used strategically. And that's why, just as I said, you will maybe go through phases where you use certain tools and then you back off from using certain tools, because yes, you push a deficit more when it's needed, but there is a fine line of pushing to the point where then you see diminishing returns. Because you push a deficit to a point and it's like a deficit is a deficit. Yes, it is. But if we all knew a deficit is a deficit. It comes down to that same thing I said at the start, where, if we all just followed metrics, prepping would be easy and getting someone in shape would be easy. But there is a point where you look at the individual, you communicate with the individual, you see the look, you see the trend, you see how their training is going, how they're feeling, and you start to realize, we're starting to see diminishing returns here now because your training's really suffering. You're dragging your ass through your steps, through your cardio. Like, you're really struggling now, and this is actually not productive. And you're not actually as responsive as we need to be. So now we need to back off. And this, again, is also very, very difficult for some people because, I actually think for most athletes, it's harder for them to back off than it is for them to push. I personally really struggle with this. That's why I could not coach myself. I mean, I very much collaboratively coach myself with AJ, but especially when it comes to like a prep situation, I could not make decisions in those latter stages because I would want to just do more. And even AJ, like, we have a relationship where, like, when he is in his final stages of prep, I have to help him because, we don't want to back off for the most part. Like, that's really difficult. That's honestly one of the most difficult parts, but it's very crucial because, again, the goal is not to bury yourself. The goal is not to show up on show day with a host of fatigue, with a body that looks like it's just had all the life sucked out of it. And is no longer focusing on that goal of displaying their best muscularity and is just tired and dieted and not looking well. Like, you have to remember that there is a push and pull process that does have to go on at certain points. And that can be really difficult to manage. And you might even notice, you have points where body weight doesn't trend down. Body weight stays the same. Maybe body weight even goes up a little bit, even, like, for example, if you were on a diet break. And especially in those final stages of prep when really body weight might not shift at all. It might not. It might be a case of, actually, when you come to those final couple of weeks, your body weight goes up a little bit as you go from a very flat and depleted state to a fuller look and a fresher look that actually looks better and is actually now actualizing condition, but your body weight's heavier because it's full now. So you think, oh no, we've gone in the wrong direction, but you haven't. And you have to remember, like, oh, right, I remember now. I'm not trying to hit a weight target. I'm not trying to be in the sub 40 kilo class. Like, that's not the goal. And oh my God, just as a tangent, that also brings me on to the point of, like, when even as a male, sometimes they have weight classes, and I will literally take this with me, like, to the grave. I don't think that it's often a very good idea to push for a weight class and sacrifice your look in order to do so. That's a story for another day, but that's just a side note for any males listening or even any coaches listening to this. Because, again, it pulls away from what is important, which is the look. And I've seen it where people have pushed for a specific weight cap because they think, oh, I'll have a better chance in that category. But they're pushing themselves down to a weight class, and then they're against other people who have just brought their best look, and then they get beaten by them. When instead you're just bringing your best look on the day, and that is what matters the most. But as I was saying, you remember in those final stages that the goal is to bring your best look. It is not about doing more, pushing harder, and adhering to that is so important because it, like I say, it can be difficult. Like, and I don't blame you for, like, struggling when your coach says do less, eat more, because it's foreign, especially if you've been in a prep for 24 weeks and your coach is saying, okay, like, let's not do as many steps a day. Let's put more food in. And now you're going from, waking up, going on a walk, coming back, being hungry across the day to, like, just resting and, like, eating carbs with all your meals. And you're like, oh my God, this is strange. But you remember that, like, oh, okay, this is the goal now. And so many people will struggle with that and want to do more. And even across the prep, like, maybe, oh, I'll sneak in some more steps here, or I'll do this there. But remember, like, that is not the goal. And that's also not helping your coach, to coach you well either. And, you know, communicating honestly with your coach about how you're feeling, how you're getting on. And, you know, especially if you are feeling tired, especially if you are struggling with adhering, whether it be doing too much or struggling to even meet the plan, like you have to communicate that with your coach so that they can help you to manage that prep as best as possible, so that it doesn't, like we say, become that dieting contest, or you know, you just think, oh, I have to do more, or I have to suffer, or whatever it may be. You find the balance that is going to bring the best for you. So that is the first and most important thing, is just understanding that overall concept that this prep is not a dieting contest, and really carrying that through with you on all those days, because we all have days where we think, I could do some more, or I can handle a bit more. Like, why? Like, it's not necessary. It's not. So the second thing to come on to then is going to be discussing why it's also not a dieting contest relative to the division that you're competing on, the class you're competing in, because that also dictates how lean you even need to get. And again, like, how lean you also get also doesn't necessarily dictate how hard you have to diet, because we all have to diet differently. But it does definitely affect the level of conditioning that you expect of yourself, because like we say at the start, we get in this headspace where we chase new lows, we want to get leaner, we want to see new lines. And that is actually not necessary for a lot of categories. The only categories that you really need to get, like, I suppose, shredded for are going to be women's physique or fit body. Or even in Australia, like the figure girls that compete in ICN is basically like our women's bodybuilding, and women's bodybuilding. So those are the divisions where, like, you do need to be very lean. Like, you know, like they are looking for striations in, like, everywhere. Like, they want to see cuts, they want to see lines, they probably want to see lines in your glutes. Like, Nicola Cottrell has literally like lines in her ass when she is in stage lean condition as a women's physique competitor. You know, like, you are very lean, even though you're maybe not tucking your glutes or whatever it may be, you're still shredded. You know, it is a serious level of condition. And that's not to say that when you compete in these other divisions like figure and bikini that you're not dieting as hard, or you're not getting as lean, because you're also getting lean relative to the muscle mass. And this is exactly why you're actually in those divisions. And this is sometimes a huge reason why, like, the division kind of chooses you a little bit rather than you choosing the class. Yes, in like an off-season setting, you will work your way up to certain classes. But when it comes to actually getting all the way down, like, your physique, when it's like as lean and as best as it will look, so when it has that balance of muscularity and condition, it will look perfect for whatever class it's meant to be. You know, because say you take a figure girl and you try and push her into the level of condition that a women's physique athlete might be in, they might then lose a really big part of their strengths, which is probably shape, structure. They might not have actually the muscle or the muscle maturity to even have lines in their quads, you know, or have striations in their triceps. So when they push for more condition, they just look like a smaller, less shapely figure girl rather than a women's physique competitor. So that's like something to take into consideration. Is obviously you're still lean relative to your physique. So I'm not saying that it's easier or harder to do one or the other, but no matter the division, like, you have to find the line of like, oh, okay, I need to get as lean as I can do to still display all of my strengths for this class. And it's the same thing. Like, you even take the extremity of women's bodybuilding and bodybuilders, is like, they will get lean enough for the class. They could always push harder, but when do they see diminishing returns? When do they start to lose muscle? When does the look start to fade? You know, it's like, you don't need to be emaciated on stage. So that stands true in any of the divisions, even the highest levels. But the main classes that this does definitely apply to is going to be bikini and figure, where when the athletes come down, they just want to see more. They think, I'm not lean enough. I don't have, like I say, lines in my quads. I don't have like dug out hamstrings and things like this. But if you try to chase for that, there is one, as I mentioned, the fact that you won't be able to display that potentially. And two, basically the fact that you will be placed down for doing that. Like, that's not part of the criteria. And I hate to see it because I love to see it, but you see it every now and then where you see a bikini girl or a figure girl where like they're pretty damn shredded, and I'm like, bloody hell, fair play, but they come dead last, and I just think, oh, it's gutting. It is gutting because you see them on stage and they're almost like confused because they're thinking like, I've worked really hard and like I'm way leaner than all these other girls, and it's like, yeah, you are, and you look mega, but it's just not what they're looking for. And you have to remember that. And that's why having a coach that really understands the criteria is really important. And also, again, it's just like understanding how you need to look and managing that expectation for yourself as you come down is really, really important. So remember, you're there to nail a look, and especially in the finishing stages, you're there to nail a look for the criteria, not to just get leaner and leaner. And especially if you're competing in natural federations, which I know not everyone listening to this podcast will, and there's a lot of amazing natural athletes who, like, for example, in the UK, like you might compete with PCA or two bros, and we spoke about this so many times on different episodes where we've had athletes who have competed in the two. But like, if you were to look at the conditioning of girls in PCA versus the conditioning of girls in like UKDFPA when it comes to bikini, there's a big difference. Like, PCA girls are a lot bigger and they're a lot leaner, whereas in UKDFPA they're a little bit softer because that's the look that they display. And it even goes the same with like two bros. Like, the level of conditioning for figure in two bros is a lot leaner than the level of conditioning in the UKDFPA for figure. Like, if you have a lot of, like I said, like separation in your quads, if you've got lines in your glutes for figure, you'll be too lean and you'll be moved up to women's physique. So it's like just kind of understanding that is really, really important. And it's why I like finding your class as well. Like I say, like finding where you fit relative to the amount of muscle mass that you have. And the condition that you get in is also important so that you can display yourself for all of your strengths. And probably maybe doing, when you do your first shows, like one, actually going to shows so you understand this is important. But also maybe when you do your first show, and it's why they often offer this for a lot of the women, is for you to cross transfer into different classes so that you can actually see where you fit a little bit more, because there is sometimes a very fine line between the two for some people, but there will often be one class that you suit a bit better than the other. So that's the second point, is we're looking at relative to the division you're in. And kind of leading on to that is now relative to, okay, how much do we need to diet? How lean do we need to get? How hard do we need to push things relative to the amount of muscle and the amount of experience that you have? And we've already kind of touched on that first point, which is the level of conditioning that you need to chase for relative to the amount of muscle mass that you've got, because you will naturally find a balance of that as you come down in the prep. And there is the balance of the amount of condition you can get in relative to the muscle you have, and then how good of a condition you can get in that's still going to make sure that you stay true to the criteria that you're trying to display. Because so many people get caught up in, oh, but I'm not leaner than, these girls in this class. And it's like, yes, I know, but you are as lean as you can be for the level of muscularity that you've got to still show your strengths. Because if you push yourself more, you're going to lose your shape. If you lose your shape and you lose your muscle, you're going to be even less competitive. And that's what you kind of have to remember, is like, okay, what's your current level of muscularity and maturity? And where do you start to see those diminishing returns? And when do you start to, push further and further away from what the judges are actually wanting to reward you? So that's a really big thing that you do really have to remember. And again, that kind of lands you in your category quite well. But even aside from your like physical readiness, so like how much muscle you have, how much condition you get to, there is also like a level of skill. like skill and experience when it comes to coming down to a specific level of condition and being dieted hard, because let's not forget, getting very lean is hard. Like, it's not easy. And for most people as well, it will be very challenging. Some people get lean easier than others, like they'll naturally maybe sit a bit leaner, but it's still difficult mentally and physically to get all the way down there. And for most people in their first ever prep, chasing for elite level of condition or a really harsh level of condition is not going to be actually achievable, honestly, because the first time that you try to get your body lean, like anecdotally, I've seen this with pretty much every athlete. It's a lot harder the first time around. It's very hard the first time around because your body's never been there. It doesn't know what it feels like, and it's just getting to body fat levels that it's never been at before. And that feels really hard. It feels really hard. It's not to say it's the same for everyone, but it's when you're in that first prep, like it's going to be difficult for you to get down to stage lean condition. It's going to feel really challenging, and for you to then try to push further and further and further is going to be both very physically and mentally demanding. And you might not have the ability to handle getting there just yet. Because like I say, the demand is overall greater, but it's also having the, like, honestly, mental ability and the mindset to be able to do that and do that well without it compromising a lot of things. Because there's a few things that you do not want to compromise with that. So we have, in general, when we look at the prep, how well can you manage being that lean and pushing that hard without genuinely getting yourself mentally in the gutters, like really, really struggling, and starting to see training suffer, seeing your relationships around you really struggle, your relationship with bodybuilding really struggle, your relationship with food, a lot of things that are probably not worth it, especially in your first prep. And I think I did a post on this the other day. I can't remember when it was now, where I kind of talked about this, where one of the things that I get really upset, like honestly, I get really upset when I see it every year, is when, you see an athlete who has been pushed either one more than they needed to be for like their class or for their division or their level of muscularity, or has been just simply pushed more than they were ready to handle in their first prep, like really, really over dieted from where they probably needed to be for a first prep. Because remember, like, you're getting into enough condition to display muscularity, but it's not a dieting contest. That's the whole point of this podcast. And they come out the back end and like they're ruined. Like, their relationship with food has been completely tarnished. They have struggled with their relationship with friends, with family. They hate training. And that's devastating to see, and it's why in that first prep, like, that is not the goal. There is a time and there is a place when somebody is ready to do that. It takes a level of skill and experience to be pushed that hard in a prep and to actually, like, yes, face challenge, but like relish in it, like enjoy it, not have it affect, your relationships, not have it affect your training to the point where you hate training, and not having it affect your love with bodybuilding. Like, there is a time and place where that is a good place to be. And like, we're not even touching on the actual like physiological health and hormonal health and the shifts that come alongside with that. Because that's a huge thing we have to take into consideration. It's like, okay, at what point now are we like really sacrificing your health, and is it worth it? And it's actually a huge reason why sometimes a lot of females don't push for those specific classes, because they don't want to get all the way down there. Like they don't want to get all the way down there because they don't want to climb back out that hole. And that's where you, like I say, you find a time and place where you have the physique and you have the skill to get into serious condition and to push yourself hard if it's required. Because again, sometimes it's actually not even required for you to be there, but there are certain only really a certain time and place where that is appropriate. And I really hope that when we go through like the athlete episodes, you're able to kind of gather that from like the different people that we speak to. And especially when, you talk to people like, or you listen to people talk like Claire, like Nicola, like the people who do get very, very lean, but have been doing this for years. Even the last episode we had Becky on, she's been competing since 2017. So she's been competing for like 7 years. And like last year, she like really, really nailed the conditioning, but that's like just time. Like it's just time doing this and having the actual muscle maturity, but also having like the mindset, the support network, everything to allow you to get there without seeing like the negative effects of that. So I really hope that kind of helps remind you of like, oh, okay, like this is all a fine balance of what is necessary for me to bring my best. And whether you're listening to this as an athlete, returning back into a season, or as a athlete doing your first season, or even as a coach putting athletes through their preps, like these are all things that you have to take into consideration when you are like pushing someone or chasing getting in stage lean condition. And honestly, like I remind myself of these things because I have to remember, even when I next compete and I'll be competing in figure, like I don't need to be crazy, crazy, crazy lean. Like I will get lean enough, but I don't need to be putting pressure on myself to look like women's physique athletes, or even girls who are 10 years older than me, because I'm not going to look like that. I need to bring what's going to be my best. And we all have to have those reminders. So I really hope that this episode has been helpful for you guys. Hope you have enjoyed listening. If anyone has any questions at all off the back of this, please do let me know because like I say, I'm always happy to answer any questions. Always very welcoming of any topic suggestions as well, because I really, really, really want to run through things that any listeners actually want to hear me talk about. So if anyone's got any suggestions, even if you want to do a bit of a Q&A episode, I'd love to do a Q&A episode where I kind of just talk through a bunch of different things. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. As I said at the start, if you can rate the podcast, like the episode if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe and share and tag me and all that amazing stuff, that would be absolutely fantastic. So yeah, thank you for listening. I will be back with another episode next week.